The stars stretched far across the dark sky like tiny eyes watching over the galaxy. Among them floated a world of gold towers and purple skies, known as Vathara Prime. This was the heart of the mighty Vathari Empire, one of the oldest and most powerful civilizations in space. On this world lived Princess Ilara Vathari, daughter of the Empress and heir to the throne. She was tall, graceful, and had silver hair that shimmered like moonlight. Her eyes were deep blue, filled with wisdom beyond her years. Many called her beautiful, but beauty was not what made her strong. Her mind and will were. Ilara had everything a royal could ever want: power, riches, knowledge, and respect. Yet something was missing. Suitors came from all corners of the galaxy, each claiming to be worthy of her hand. They brought gifts of crystal cities, ancient weapons, and even entire moons wrapped in silk-like energy fields. But none truly impressed her. One day, standing on a balcony high above the capital city, she made a decision. She would not marry just anyone who bowed and flattered her. She would only accept someone who proved themselves through trial. So she sent out a message across the stars. Any suitor who wished to win her heart must pass 3 trials. These trials were said to be deadly, crafted by the greatest minds of her people. No one had ever returned after entering them. Still, the message spread fast. Ships flew through wormholes and jumped between stars, bringing warriors, kings, scholars, and beasts to Vathara Prime. Some came in shining armor, others in robes stitched with spells. They spoke 1,000 languages and carried weapons from forgotten wars. They all believed they were special. They believed they were ready. But none came back. Weeks passed, then months. The line of suitors grew longer, but so did the list of failures. Some were broken by fear, others by pride or greed. The trials did not care how strong or clever you were. They tested the soul. In the halls of the palace, whispers grew louder. The nobles began to worry. If no one could pass the trials, who would sit beside Ilara on the throne? Some feared she would rule alone forever, while others thought she might never marry at all. Yet Ilara remained calm. She watched from her tower as another suitor entered the gates. He was a warlord from the Twin Sun system, covered in scars and wearing armor forged from blackened star metal. He walked with confidence, but his eyes showed doubt. He too vanished into the trials. Days passed. Nothing. Then one morning a servant ran through the palace screaming. The warlord had been found, half dead, curled up near the trial entrance, whispering about shadows that screamed his name. After that, fewer suitors came. Word spread that the trials were not just hard, they were cruel. They didn't just test strength or skill. They tore open your past and forced you to face it. Many gave up, until one day a small ship landed outside the palace gates. It looked old and tired, patched together with parts from other ships. It bore no flags, no noble symbols, no signs of wealth or power. From it stepped a man named Jake Harlow. He wore a faded pilot jacket and boots that had seen better days. His hair was messy, and he looked more confused than confident. He wasn't here because he wanted a kingdom. He wasn't even sure why he was there. He had heard about the trials in a bar on a dusty planet far away. The bartender told him it was a death sentence. That made him laugh. Maybe that was why he signed up. Now, standing at the gates of the great palace, he looked up at the golden towers and whispered to himself, "Well, here goes nothing." Liam Carter was not a hero. He wasn't rich or powerful. He didn't have a title or a palace. He was just a man who used to fly ships for the Earth military, but now he flew cargo between planets for money. He lived a quiet life, flying from one colony to another, delivering supplies, picking up goods, and sometimes doing jobs for people who needed things moved fast and without questions. He liked the stars. They were peaceful. No politics, no drama, just silence and light. One day, while docked at a space station near Mars, he heard about Queen Vera's challenge. She was an alien queen from a powerful empire called the Zilari Dominion. She had set up 3 impossible trials for any suitor who wanted to marry her and rule beside her. Many had tried: kings, warriors, scholars. None had passed all 3 trials. Some barely made it through one. And now, she had said, if no one could finish them in the next few weeks, she would stop looking forever. Most humans laughed when they heard about it. Some said it was a waste of time. Others said it was too dangerous. But Liam? He found himself thinking about it more than he should. He wasn't looking for love. He wasn't even sure he believed in that anymore. But something about the way the Queen refused to settle, the way she dared anyone to prove themselves worthy, caught his attention. So after a few days of thinking and watching old videos of the trials, Liam did something he rarely did. He made a choice without overthinking it. He signed up. He didn't tell anyone. Not his friends, not his sister back on Earth, not even his co-pilot. He just filled out the form, paid the travel fee, and booked passage to the Xelari floating palace where the trials would take place. When he arrived, he stood in line with other suitors from across the galaxy. There were tall, insectoid lords, armored reptilian warlords, and even a floating jellyfish prince wrapped in glowing robes. Everyone looked like they belonged in some kind of legend. Liam looked like a guy who forgot to shave and wore the same jacket for 3 days. People stared. Some laughed. Others ignored him completely. He didn't care. He had flown through asteroid storms and dodged enemy fire. A few side eyes weren't going to scare him. As the suitors entered the grand hall of the palace, a voice announced each name and title. When it was Liam's turn, the voice paused. Liam Carter, of Earth. A few chuckles echoed through the chamber. Earth was known but not respected. Not yet. Queen Vera watched from above as the suitors gathered. She saw Liam standing alone, hands in his pockets, looking around like he was visiting a museum instead of trying to win a queen's hand. She raised an eyebrow. This one was different. But different didn't mean strong. And tomorrow, the first trial would begin. The darkness inside the trial chamber was thick like fog, but colder. It pressed against Jake's skin like invisible hands. He could hear his own breath, loud and steady. There were no lights, no walls, just a deep, endless space that made him feel like he had stepped outside the universe. Then, without warning, the floor beneath him changed. It became soft, warm. He looked down and saw sand. Real sand, like on a beach. Waves crashed in the distance. The air smelled like salt and fire. He turned around. Behind him, the dark door was gone. Ahead, a small boy stood in the water, calling, out for help. Please, I can't swim. Jake ran toward him, heart pounding. The boy was young, maybe 10 years old. He wore a torn shirt and old shorts. His arms flailed as the tide pulled him further out. Jake dove into the water without thinking. It was freezing. The current was strong, pulling at his legs like invisible ropes. He fought through the waves, reaching for the boy. Just a little more. Then the sky cracked open with lightning, and everything changed. The boy vanished. The ocean disappeared. Jake found himself standing in a burning city, smoke filling the sky. People screamed all around him. Ships fell from the sky like dying birds. A voice called his name. He turned and saw a man running toward him, older, wearing a pilot's jacket, face covered in soot. His brother. Get to the evac ship, the man shouted. Now, Jake tried to run, but the ground shook. A building collapsed behind them, dust filled the air. When it cleared, his brother was gone. Jake dropped to his knees. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. But it felt real. This was the day he lost his brother. The day his home planet was attacked. The day he escaped alone. And now somehow, he was living it again. The voices of the dead whispered around him. The fire grew hotter, the screams louder. Some people would have broken here. They would have curled up and begged for it to stop. Not Jake. He stood up, wiped his face, looked around. If this is a test, he said out loud, then what do you want me to do? The world shifted again. Now he was back on the beach. The boy was still drowning. Jake didn't hesitate. He swam faster this time. Reached the boy, grabbed him, pulled him to shore. When he did, the beach turned into light. Everything faded, and then he was standing in a white room. Empty, silent. A voice spoke from nowhere. You faced your past. You did not run. You did not break. Jake took a deep breath. Wasn't planning to. A door opened in front of him. Outside, sunlight poured in. He stepped through. On the other side, the nobles and guards stared at him in shock. He was alive. He had come out. Ilara watched from her balcony. Her eyes were wide. She had seen others enter this trial. Some screamed until their voices gave out. Some never moved at all. But Jake, he walked out like he had just woken up from a dream. Her advisor stepped beside her. He passed the first trial, he said, almost in disbelief. Ilara nodded slowly. Yes, she said. He did. She looked at Jake again. He was tired but smiling. Something about him made her heart beat faster. For the first time since she started these trials, she wanted to see what happened next. Jake didn't get much rest after the first trial. Barely a few hours passed before the palace guards came for him again. The second trial was ready. He followed them through the golden halls, his body still tired from what he had just been through. The memories still clung to him like smoke. His brother's voice, the fire, the boy in the water. They weren't real, but they felt like they were. He tried to shake it off as they walked. The palace was quieter now. Word had spread that he survived the first test. Some nobles watched him with curiosity, others with doubt. A few still smirked, thinking he wouldn't make it past this next one. They led him to a great hall where Ilara sat on a raised platform, dressed in flowing silver robes. Her eyes met his the moment he entered. You passed the first trial, she said, her voice calm but full of interest. Barely, Jake replied with a small grin. She studied him for a moment, then nodded toward a large doorway behind her, then entered the second trial. The doors opened with a deep groan. Beyond them was a dark tunnel lined with glowing symbols. The air felt heavier here, like it carried secrets. Without hesitation, Jake stepped inside. The moment he crossed the threshold, the world changed. He found himself standing at the entrance of a massive maze. Walls of black stone stretched high into the sky, shifting slowly like they were alive. The air was thick with whispers, soft voices that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere. This wasn't just a maze. It was something else. It was meant to break minds. The second trial was called the Labyrinth of Lies, and its purpose was simple: expose the truth of the suitor's heart. Greed, fear, pride. They all had a way of showing themselves in this place. Others who had entered before saw visions of power, riches, or revenge. Many never left, trapped by their own desires. Jake took a step forward. The walls shifted. A path opened. He followed it. Soon he saw things too. A pile of gold coins stacked so high it touched the sky. A door that promised to show him his brother again. A throne made of crystal waiting for him to sit. But Jake didn't stop. He kept walking. Then he heard a sound, a soft cry, like a child. He turned down a side path and found a little girl sitting alone in the dark. She looked scared, her clothes torn, her eyes wide with tears. "Help me," she whispered. Most suitors would have ignored her. They were told the maze played tricks. They were warned not to trust anything they saw. But Jake didn't hesitate. He crouched beside the girl. "Hey, you okay?" She shook her head. "I'm lost." "Me too," he said with a smile. "But we can find our way out together." He picked her up gently and kept moving. The maze reacted. Walls twisted faster. More illusions appeared. Temptations, fears, promises of power. But none of them touched him. As long as he held the girl, the maze couldn't trick him. Finally, they reached a door at the end of a long corridor. It glowed softly like morning light. Jake reached for the handle. The girl vanished. Not with a scream, not with a fight. Just gone. He stood there for a second, then smiled. "Thanks, kid." He opened the door. On the other side, sunlight hit his face. He stepped out. Again, the nobles and guards stared. Another trial. Passed. Ilara stood up from her seat, eyes wide with surprise and something deeper. Her advisor whispered beside her. He didn't fall for the illusions. He chose kindness over power. Ilara nodded slowly. He sees the world differently, she said, and for the first time, she wondered if, maybe, just maybe, he was the one. But there was still one more trial to go, and it was the deadliest of all. Jake stood outside the final trial's entrance, staring at the massive stone doors in front of him. They were carved with glowing symbols that pulsed like a heartbeat. The air around them felt heavy, like the world itself was holding its breath. Behind him, nobles and guards watched in silence. No one had ever made it this far. Not once in all the years the trials had been held. Some thought the third test was unbeatable. Others believed it was just a way to kill those who got too close to the throne. But Jake didn't care what anyone thought. He had come this far, and he wasn't turning back now. A deep voice echoed from the palace behind him. "This is the last trial," said Ilara, standing on a raised platform above the crowd. Her silver robes shimmered in the light, and her eyes were locked on his. "Many have tried. None have returned." Jake gave her a tired grin. "Well, I guess I'll be the first then." He turned toward the doors and placed his hands on them. With a slow grinding sound, they opened. Firelight spilled out. Inside, the chamber was massive. Walls of black stone rose high into the darkness. At the center of the room stood something that made Jake stop in his tracks. A creature. It was tall, taller than any man or beast he had ever seen. Its body was made of fire and shadow, shifting, like smoke caught in flame. Two burning eyes stared at him from under a crown of horns. It didn't move at first. It only watched. Then it roared. The sound shook the ground beneath Jake's feet. Flames burst from its mouth and arms, lighting up the entire chamber. It stepped forward, each footfall leaving behind scorched stone. Others had faced this thing before. They had brought swords, guns, spells. They had fought with strength and pride, and they had all failed. Jake didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't run. Instead, he took a deep breath and did something no one expected. He started singing. A soft tune filled the chamber. It was an old lullaby his mother used to sing when he was a child. It wasn't loud. It wasn't powerful, but it was real. The creature stopped moving. Its burning eyes narrowed. The flames around its body flickered like candlelight in the wind. Jake kept singing. His voice wasn't perfect. It cracked a little from tiredness and fear. But it carried something else, something the creature hadn't heard in a long time. Kindness. Memories. Understanding. Slowly, the fire around the beast began to dim. Its form softened, no longer shifting wildly. It dropped to one knee, still watching him. Jake finished the song. Silence filled the chamber. Then the creature spoke, not in words, but in feeling. A voice that came from deep inside the room, echoing through the stone. You see beyond strength. You hear beyond sound. You feel beyond fear. The fire around the beast faded completely. It bowed its head. And then, it vanished. The chamber grew quiet again. Jake stood alone. Behind him, the doors opened. Outside, the palace was silent. Even the wind seemed to pause. Ilara stood up from her seat, eyes wide. He had done it. All 3 trials. He had passed them all. Jake stepped out into the sunlight, blinking against the brightness. The crowd stared at him like he was something more than human. Maybe he was. Ilara walked down from her platform, her heart pounding in her chest. She had seen kings fall, warriors break, and scholars go mad in those trials. But this man, this simple, strange human, had walked through fire and fear with nothing but a song. She reached him and looked into his tired eyes. "You are different," she whispered. Jake gave her a small smile. "Guess I am." The crowd broke into whispers. Some cheered, some argued. But it didn't matter, because for the first time since the trials began, someone had proven themselves worthy, and that someone was a human. The palace buzzed with talk. Some called it a miracle. Others called it a mistake. A few whispered that it wasn't fair. How could a human, a species barely known beyond its own star system, pass trials that had broken gods and emperors? But no one could deny what had happened. Jake Harlow had passed all 3 trials. He stood in the great hall of the palace, surrounded by nobles, advisors, and guards who still looked at him like he was something strange. Sunlight poured through high windows, lighting up the golden walls. Banners hung from the ceiling, each bearing the symbols of ancient houses and powerful worlds. Alara sat on her throne, watching him closely. She had seen thousands come and fail, but this man, this pilot from a backwater planet, had done what no other could. He hadn't used brute strength or magic. He had used his heart. "You have proven yourself," she said, her voice clear and strong. "No suitor has ever made it this far. You are the first." A silence fell over the room. Then, one of the elder nobles stepped forward. He wore a robe stitched with silver thread and held a staff carved from black stone. "Your Highness," he said, bowing slightly. "This is unexpected. We must consider this carefully. A human as ruler. It is not tradition." Others nodded, murmuring their agreement. Alara's eyes narrowed. "Tradition does not decide worth," she said. "He passed the trials. That is the law." Another noble, a woman with sharp features and cold eyes, spoke next. Perhaps he was lucky. Perhaps the trials were weakened. Jake gave a tired chuckle. "If you think that's true," he said, "why don't you try them yourself?" The noble woman stiffened but said nothing. Alara stood from her throne and walked down the steps, her silver robes flowing behind her. When she reached Jake, she looked him in the eye. "You have earned the right to stand beside me," she said. "Do you accept?" For a moment, Jake didn't answer. He looked around the room. At the nobles, the guards, the people who had watched him suffer, doubted him, and now stared at him like he had grown a second head. He had come here thinking it would be a joke, a way to escape boredom, maybe make a name for himself. Now he was being offered half a galaxy. He let out a slow breath. "I'll need time to think about it," he said. Some nobles gasped, others frowned. Alara simply smiled. "Of course," she said. "But know this. If you say yes, you will not just be my husband. You will be a ruler, a leader, and the first human to hold such power." Jake rubbed the back of his neck. "That's a lot." Alara tilted her head. "You faced fire and fear without flinching. Can you really tell me this is more terrifying than that?" Jake thought about it. Then he grinned. Maybe not. Word spread fast across the palace and beyond. The human had passed the trials. He had been offered the throne. And now, the future of the Vathari Empire hung in the balance. Some feared change, others welcomed it. And deep in the halls of the palace, Alara watched Jake walk away, her heart beating faster than it should. She had spent years searching for someone worthy. Maybe, just maybe, she had found him. Not because he was strong, not because he was rich, but because he was different, because he was human. Life in the palace was not what Jake had expected. He had imagined fancy rooms, good food, and maybe a little peace after all he had been through. But being royalty wasn't just about sitting on a throne and looking important. It was about rules, meetings, and people who never seemed to stop talking. Every morning he was woken up by servants who insisted on dressing him in clothes that felt too stiff and too shiny. Then came breakfast with Alara, followed by hours of lessons on galactic politics, ancient laws, and how to greet visiting diplomats without offending them. He failed at that last one more than once. During a formal dinner with leaders from 3 different star systems, he accidentally insulted an ambassador by eating food that was meant to be a sacred offering. No one yelled, but the look on their faces was enough to make him wish for another trial instead. "I'm sorry," he said, later rubbing his face. "I didn't know that fruit was supposed to represent eternal peace or whatever." Alara tried not to laugh. She really did. But she couldn't help it. "You're terrible at this," she said, smiling. "I know," he replied, "but I'm trying." And he was. Even though he messed up often, people started to notice something about him. He wasn't like the nobles, who spoke in perfect lines and never showed weakness. He made mistakes, admitted them, and laughed at himself. He treated servants like real people. He asked questions even when they sounded silly. Slowly, people began to like him, not because he was powerful, not because he was royal, but because he was honest. One day, while walking through the palace gardens, Elara watched as Jake talked to a group of young workers who were planting new trees. They were laughing, listening to him tell a story about a time he crashed his ship into a sand dune and got stuck for 2 days. She smiled. He fit in, even if he didn't always realize it. Later that evening, they sat together on a balcony overlooking the city. Lights twinkled below like stars fallen to the ground. The air was warm, filled with the scent of blooming flowers. Elara looked at him. "Do you think you could stay?" she asked. "For real?" Jake was quiet for a moment. He thought about Earth, about the life he had left behind. He missed some things: the smell of rain, the sound of music in crowded bars, the freedom of flying without rules. But here, in this strange place among alien skies, he had found something he hadn't known he was missing: a purpose, a home, maybe even love. He turned to her. "If you promise not to make me wear those weird hats again." "Yeah," he said with a grin. "I'll stay." Elara laughed softly. "Deal." From that night on, things changed. Jake stopped trying to pretend he was like the other rulers. He didn't need to be. Instead, he used his own way of thinking to change things in the Empire. He suggested new ways to talk with other species, ways that focused on understanding rather than power. Some nobles resisted at first, but others saw the results. Trade improved. Conflicts were solved with words instead of weapons. Humans, once seen as weak or unimportant, began to gain respect across the galaxy. And slowly, Elara found herself looking forward to every moment with Jake. His jokes, his stories, the way he looked at the world like it was still full of wonder. He made her see things differently too, made her crave more than duty, made her want to feel, to live, to love. And for the first time in her life, Elara wasn't afraid of that. Not everyone was happy with the changes happening in the Vethari Empire. In a distant palace on a world wrapped in storm clouds, a man named Kale Wren watched a recording of Jake Harlow standing beside Elara. His jaw tightened as he saw how she looked at him, not with duty but with something deeper. Kale had known Elara since they were children. They had been promised to each other by their families, a union meant to strengthen two great bloodlines. He was strong, smart, and respected among the noble houses. He believed he was the only one worthy of ruling beside her. And now, some human from a forgotten planet had taken what was his. He stood up from his throne and turned to his advisor, an older woman with sharp eyes and a voice like steel. "This cannot be allowed," he said. "A human has no place in our empire, let alone at her side." The advisor nodded slowly. "Many agree with you, Prince Kale. The nobles are uneasy. If you challenge him, many will support you." Kale smiled, cold and sure. "Then I will do more than challenge him. I will defeat him." Within days, a message was sent across the stars. Kale called for a formal duel, not just to test strength, but to decide who would stand beside the future empress. According to ancient law, if a royal match was made without noble approval, a challenge could be issued. If Jake lost, he would have to leave, never to return. If he won, the union would be sealed beyond doubt. The message reached the palace, late at night. Elara read it in silence, her face unreadable. Beside her, Jake leaned against a wall, arms crossed. "So, someone wants to fight me?" he asked. "Kyle Wren," she said. "Son of the Stormlords, one of the most powerful warriors in the galaxy." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Sounds fun." Elara looked at him, worried. "You don't understand. He has fought in 100 battles. He has crushed armies." Jake shrugged. "I've crashed into planets and survived. That counts for something, right?" She didn't laugh. This wasn't a joke to her. "You don't have to accept. We can refuse the challenge." Jake thought about it. Then he shook his head. "No, if this is what it takes to prove I belong here, then I'll do it." The day of the duel arrived fast. The palace arena was filled with people. Nobles sat in high seats watching closely. Soldiers stood along the edges, ready to stop any violence beyond the match. At the center of it all stood Chaol, wearing armor carved with symbols of war. He looked like a warrior born from legend. Jake stood across from him, still wearing his usual jacket, hands in his pockets. Some in the crowd laughed. Others whispered that this was already over. Chaol stepped forward, voice loud and clear. "Human, you are not of our kind. You do not know our ways. You do not belong here." Jake gave him a tired look. "Yeah, I get that a lot." Chaol raised a weapon, a blade made of crackling energy. The crowd gasped. Jake didn't move. "Fight me," Kyle demanded. Jake sighed. "Look, I'm not really into fighting," Chaol charged. But Jake didn't raise his fists. Instead, he moved. Fast and clever, dodging, ducking, always staying just out of reach. Chaol swung again and again, growing frustrated. Finally, Jake stopped. "Can we talk instead?" he asked. Chaol growled and attacked once more. Jake caught his arm and twisted, making him stumble. Then, in front of everyone, he spoke. "You want to rule because you think you deserve it. But leadership isn't about birthright. It's about what you do with it." Then, before anyone could react, Jake pulled a small device from his pocket and pressed a button. Screens around the arena lit up, showing hidden messages between Chaol and corrupt nobles. Plans to overthrow Ilara and take the throne for himself. The crowd fell silent. Chaol stared at the screens, shocked. Jake looked at the people. "Anyone else still think I'm not worthy?" Nobody answered. Because the truth was clear. He had won without even needing to fight. After the duel, life changed for both Jake and Ilara. Chaol was stripped of his titles and exiled to a distant moon, where he would spend his days thinking about what had gone wrong. The nobles who had supported him were quietly removed from power, or forced to swear loyalty to the new rulers. Jake didn't ask for punishment, only peace. And that made people notice. In the weeks that followed, the palace felt different. Lighter. Even the guards smiled more. The once stiff meetings became shorter and more honest. Jake didn't speak like a noble or act like he had all the answers, but people listened to him anyway, because he cared. One evening, as the sky above Vethara Prime turned purple with sunset, Ilara stood on a quiet balcony overlooking the city. She wore a simple dress instead of royal robes, her silver hair loose around her shoulders. Jake joined her, holding 2 small cups filled with warm drink. He handed one to her. "Earth style," he said. "Hope you don't mind." She took a sip and smiled. "It's good." They stood in silence for a while, watching the lights below flicker like stars. "You know," Jake said, "I never thought I'd be here, standing beside someone like you, helping run a whole empire." Ilara looked at him. "Someone like me?" "Yeah," he said with a grin. "Smart, powerful, beautiful. Kinda scary when you're angry." She laughed softly. "And what do you think now? Still wish you were back on Earth?" Jake thought about it. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But not for long. I used to think freedom meant flying through space with no rules. But now, being here, with you, helping people, that feels like something bigger." Ilara looked at him closely. "You've changed me too," she said. "Before you came, I saw duty as everything. I thought strength was the only way to lead. But you showed me there's more to it." "Like what?" he asked. "Like kindness," she said. "And understanding. And sometimes, just listening." Jake smiled. "Well, I'm good at that, when I'm not talking too much." They both laughed. From that day on, they spent more time together, not just ruling, but learning each other's worlds. Ilara visited Earth for the first time. She stepped off the ship wearing a simple cloak instead of her usual royal clothes. The air smelled different, like rain, metal, and something she couldn't name. The sky was gray, the streets full of noise and movement. People stared at her, but she didn't care. She walked beside Jake through a busy market, watching how humans lived. She tried street food that made her eyes water. She danced to loud music in a small bar. She watched children play in the rain without caring if their clothes got wet. And she loved it. Your world is chaotic, she told Jake later. Yeah, he said, but it's alive. Back on Vathara Prime, Jake showed her how to enjoy the little things too. They watched sunsets together. They read stories from old books. They talked late into the night, sharing dreams and fears. Slowly, something grew between them. Not just respect, not just duty. Something deeper. Love. And for the first time in her life, Elara didn't try to hide it. She reached for Jake's hand, and he held it, smiling. Together, they weren't just rulers, they were partners, and the galaxy began to see it too. Whispers spread among the stars of a human and a princess who ruled not with fear, but with heart. And somewhere deep inside, Elara knew. This was only the beginning of something greater than either of them. The changes began slowly, but they spread like ripples across the stars. Under Jake and Elara's rule, the Vathari Empire started to look different. Where once only noble bloodlines could hold power, now voices from all species were heard. Humans, once seen as weak or unimportant, were given roles in trade, science, and even diplomacy. Some nobles resisted at first, whispering behind closed doors, but they saw how the people responded, how the soldiers fought with pride, how trade routes opened faster than ever before. Because for the first time, leadership wasn't just about strength or tradition, it was about heart. Jake didn't wear a crown. He didn't speak in ancient royal lines or carry a sword made from starfire, but he brought something new: ideas, laughter, and a way of seeing the world that made others think differently. He walked through the palace halls like he belonged there, even if he still tripped over fancy rugs sometimes. He ate meals with servants and guards, not just nobles. He listened when people spoke, even if what they said was hard to hear. And slowly, the galaxy changed because of it. One day, Elara stood on the palace balcony, looking out over the city. Lights shimmered, below like fallen stars. Ships moved through the sky like fireflies. Beside her, Jake leaned against the railing, holding a cup of warm drink. You know, he said, I used to think Earth was the only home I'd ever have. Elara looked at him. And now? He smiled. Now I think home is wherever you are. She felt her heart beat a little faster. They had come so far, from trials and battles, from doubt and fear. And now they stood together, shaping the future. A messenger arrived, bowing before them. Your Highnesses, he said. Word has come from the outer systems. Other empires are asking to join our alliance. Elara raised an eyebrow. Really? The messenger nodded. They say, if a human could earn a throne, then maybe peace is possible between us all. Jake gave a soft laugh. Guess we're starting something bigger than we thought. In the months that followed, more planets joined the alliance. Leaders who had once seen each other as enemies now sat at the same table. Trade grew. Wars ended. Old wounds began to heal. Humans were no longer just travelers in the dark. They were builders of something new. And at the center of it all stood a pilot from Earth and a princess from the stars. Together. As time passed, whispers turned into songs, and songs into stories. In spaceports and palaces alike, people told tales of the man who passed the trials with nothing but courage and kindness, of the woman who found love in the most unexpected place. And somewhere, deep in the heart of the Empire, a child was born, half human, half Vathari, the first of many, a symbol of unity, a promise of what was to come. And across the stars, the message spread. If a human could do it, so can we.